Good morning, everybody. We're looking at Psalm 56, 57, and 58 this morning as David talks about some of his need for God's justice and protective care over his life because of some of the difficult circumstances that are happening to him. And so we'll continue looking at that. And, wonder what's going on here. Okay, that's the only page that's like that. I don't know what happened there. All right, so remember the book of Psalms is made up of 5 books, and our plan for the next for 4 years is to do book 1. Last year we did that. Book 2 right now. Books 3 and 4 next year. Book 5 the year after that. And we've been using Ephesians 5:18 and 19, where it says, "Do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs." We've been using that passage as a lens by which we're looking at this book. The reason why somebody would want to be drunk with wine is to escape reality. It's to not have to deal with hardships in their life, to kind of ease up for just a moment so that they don't have to look at the difficulties of their circumstances. Would maybe be some reason somebody would do that. And rather than doing that, the book of Psalms is supposed to be something that we're filled with. Because the book of Psalms deals with every difficulty and emotional struggle that somebody can experience. And just as a review, what are some of the emotions you've seen David or any of the writers of the Psalms talk about to this point? Fear? Yeah, there's a lot of thankfulness, betrayal, some that people would describe as depression. And this is the Jewish hymn book that shows people pouring out their hearts to God as they have these challenging circumstances, trusting that God can do something about it for them. And so as we continue looking at this morning, David is going to talk about some of the betrayal that he's experiencing. I think at the hands of Saul, one of them is going to say that specifically in the title, if I remember right. And so that's what we're going to be continuing to look at this morning. As we get into this, let's open up with a word of prayer. Our Father, we thank you that the book of Psalms gives us a language for prayer, that we can see how people poured themselves out to you. We pray, Lord, that we would imitate that, and that whatever difficulty we're going through, that we would go to you first. We thank you for your kindness. We thank you for sustaining the life of David and other people who wrote these things. We pray that we would get the intended message out of them and that it would penetrate our hearts so that we would live in such a way that would glorify you. Thank you for Jesus, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. I'm going to show you this. There's several psalms that give a historical marker on when they were written. And book 1 that we looked at last year had, 5 of those? But book 2 has got the highest concentration of them. And within book 2, they're all spanning from chapters 51 to 63. And this is where above the first verse, there's some kind of a description of what's going on. So like if you look at Psalm 56, it says, "To the choir master according to the dove on far-off Tabernath, a Michtam of David when the Philistines seized him in Gath." And so we get the historical background of that one and also the next one that we're going to be looking at this morning. But when we think about the life circumstance that David is going through, and we can remember some of what's going on, try to imagine David somewhere in that context, secluding himself, going off by himself, and writing these things down. And so what we'll do, like we do with all of these classes, is we will first of all summarize the psalm and then give an outline of it, and then we'll ask the 4 questions we've been asking. So the summary of Psalm 56. David seeks God's mercy as he faces relentless enemies. He expresses his fear but declares his trust in God, who sees his tears and knows his struggles. David's confidence in God's protection grows as he remembers that God is for him and will ultimately deliver him. And the outline of this, the first 4 verses, you see him crying out for mercy. Verses 5 through 9, God sees that David is suffering. David is acknowledging that God sees it. And then verses 10 to 13, David expresses his trust that God will do something about his circumstances. So let's go ahead and read Psalm 56, and then we'll ask the first question, just what do you notice? So as I read this, just anything that sticks out to you that's interesting, anything that you're wondering about, anything that this reminds you of, or any prayers that you think you could build from this psalm are going to be the 4 questions that we ask. So let's go ahead and read this. Be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me. All day long an attacker oppresses me. My enemies trample on me all day long, for many attack me proudly. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you, in God whose word I praise. In God I trust, I will not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? All day long they injure my cause. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They stir up strife, they lurk. They watch my steps as they have waited for my life. For their crime will they escape. In wrath cast down the peoples, O God. You have kept count of my tossings, put my tears in your bottle, are they not in your book? Then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. This I know, that God is for me. In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise. In God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? I must perform my vows to you, O God. I will render thank offerings to you, for you have delivered my soul from death, yes, my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. All right, let's ask the first question here. What do you notice in this psalm? Yeah, being tormented. This happened when the Philistines seized him in Gath, and so that sounds like a very terrifying kind of moment. Good. What else? What was that? Yes, yeah, he's expressing that in this difficult circumstance, I'm not going to anything else other than God. God is going to be the one that I put my confidence in. He's the one that I'm looking for deliverance. What else? Yep.
It alternates between saying, this is what my enemies are doing to me, and then I put my trust in you.
Yes, good. So it's like he goes between this is how I'm being treated, I'm trusting you, this is how I'm being treated, as if this is like a mantra that he keeps reciting to himself. Whenever he thinks about the bad things, he remembers God. Thinks about bad things, remembers God. And it's not all just thinking about the bad things. Like he's preaching to himself. Good. What else do you see? Yeah, he knows that God is still with him despite difficult circumstances. And these difficult circumstances, 3 times in the first 5 verses, all day long, this is how I'm being treated. I don't see an end in sight. It doesn't seem, except he trusts that God will do something about it. Notice also in verses 4 and 11, the repetition of the phrase, what can man do to me? Like, I'm being mistreated all day long, but what's the worst that man can do to me? And 1 Peter picks up some of that same language as well. What else do you guys see here? Yep.
I was thinking of a parallel when the Christians are praying for Peter being in prison.
Yeah.
That they may have looked at this psalm and thought about this.
Yeah. Yeah, in Acts 12, when the ninja angel delivers Peter from the prison. Yeah, good. I assume he was a ninja angel. Anything else you guys notice here? I thought it was interesting in verse 7, where it says, in wrath cast down the peoples, O God. I really used to, when I was a new Christian, look at phrases like that in the Psalms and go, what's wrong with David's attitude? And we've talked about this before, but the fact David is praying for God to do something means he knows it's not his job to do something. And so he trusts God's wrath to handle the situation. For him to express that is not to express some kind of vindictive hatred, but a trust that God is going to do something about it. I also thought it was interesting in verse 8, you have kept count of my tossings, put my tears in your bottle, are they not in your book? Whenever you think about the book of God's records, in my mind, before I noticed this, I just always thought, like, he just keeps record of all your sins. But what's he keeping record of here? Your troubles and sorrows. Does God, God he's taking all of the tears and putting it into a bottle. Like every one of them is precious in God's sight, and he knows what David is going through, and he's going to be there for him. And so, very beautiful ways of describing all of this. Anything else under the question of what do you notice? Yeah.
Going back to verse 4 and 11, what can make you believe in Jesus? In Matthew 10:28,
Yep.
it says, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell."
Yeah, the worst that man can do to us is kill us. And would that bring us closer to the Lord if we were a Christian? So we should fear God. But I think what David means when he says, "What can man do to me?" here is they're not actually going to kill me. But then the New Testament takes that same language and says, well, the worst they can do to you is kill you. Because Jesus has brought the immortality to light through the gospel, and so we have a better sense of what that could even mean fully. Yeah.
These resolves are made faithful to the covenant according to verse 12, very covenantal vows, offerings or thank offerings.
Yes.
That's what he can control is his thankfulness to God.
Yes. Yep. I can control my attitude. I can't control everything. I'm laying everything on God and see what he's going to do, but I can control my demeanor right now. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it seems like the cause, and that was for me, that was one of the things that I was wondering. What was David's cause? What's meant by that? In that footnote, they're twisting his words. What's being emphasized here maybe is not just that David is physically in danger, although I think that's part of it, but it's also that people are twisting his words. Have you ever had somebody twist your words and they insisted that you said something that you didn't say? And anytime you opened your mouth to try to defend yourself a little bit, they would take anything you further said and use it against you. And so David is just, his cause being the cause of the Lord, or his words that are being twisted, depending on the footnote there. Does anybody have a different translation that renders verse 3, where it says, where it brings up his cause? Or verse 5. I put the wrong verse up there. Okay, so the CSB just says it that way. What is the new? Anybody have the New King James? That's what the New King James says? Was there something else over here that I was missing? Okay. All right. Yeah, so it could just mean they're twisting his words could be the idea there, and that should be verse 5. In verse 1, I was wondering, "Be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me." If David is intentionally bringing this contrast between man and God, like he's remembering at the very beginning, this is what man's doing to me, but I'm going to God who can do something about the situation. And I think that's one of the importances of praying in trial, is if you go to God, God is much bigger than whatever the problem is. And if you start in prayer acknowledging who God is, your problem may seem smaller, but it's still going to be real to you. So I'm not taking away the reality of it, because he talks about the reality of his own sorrows as well here. Anything else you guys want to that you wondered about here? All right, let's go to the next question then. Anything that you're reminded of? Any other passages, anything else like that? For me, we kind of alluded to this earlier, but the theme of David's enemies that began around Psalm 51 or 52 through chapter 65 is this sustained section of Psalms from David, where he keeps talking about the mistreatment that he experienced. But anything that you guys are reminded of throughout this section, or this psalm? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, when you start to look at some of these things that David wrote, you see how they just kind of bleed into the New Testament. Like the writers of the New Testament were so familiar with this stuff that it just became part of how they talked. And even in the book of Hebrews, sometimes the writer will say, it says somewhere in Scripture. Like, they didn't have, they had books, but they didn't have chapters and verses. but it was so much part of him that it just bled out of him. And you ask yourself the question, do you ever talk the way that the writers of the Psalms talk? Anything else for what you're reminded of here? Verses 12 and 13 talk about offerings to the Lord after rescue. Reminds me of Ecclesiastes 5 about being very careful before you make a vow. It seems like possibly David has made a vow or will make a vow that if you rescue me from this, I will do such and such for you. Seems like that was something that happened at times in the Old Testament. Or he could be talking about just the general vow of following the Lord, obeying him, being part of the covenant people, something like that. All right. Any prayers that you guys thought of you could build from this for your own life? Yeah.
all of God's strong men in the Old Testament, I think, went through this. And this kind of sums up from Moses, Abraham, all of the great men. The more that you're known, the more people want to attack you, bring you down, where Satan has a foothold.
Yes.
The more we need to pray that no matter where we are, and people knowing us and our reputation, we still have to pray constantly to be humble to God.
Yeah, good. So David he was known by people. He kept trusting in the Lord. And wherever we're at with our reputation, people twisting our words, whatever it might be, don't ever think you've gotten to a point where you don't need to pray anymore. And so help me to trust you when I fear. Help me see the light of life in verse 13. Ultimately, for us, that would be the afterlife. But I think David is asking literally for the preservation of his physical life there. All right, anything else you guys want to say about Psalm 56? All right, let's move to Psalm 57 then. Psalm 57 summary, a cry for refuge as David hides from Saul in a cave. He pleads for God's protection. Despite his situation, David remains confident that God will fulfill his purpose and will be exalted. The psalm shifts from petition to praise as David trusts in God's steadfast love. And outline of this, verses 1 through 3, seeking refuge in God. Verses 4 through 6, faith in adversity. And then 7 through 11 is praising God's glory. You see very similar kind of themes to what we just saw. But it seems like the darkness of David's life during this time period when he's running from Saul is pretty sustained. It's not like it just changes after a day or two, which causes him to have to continually pray things that sort of sound similar. But look at Psalm 57. To the choir master according to do not destroy, a Michtam of David when he fled from Saul in the cave. Try to imagine him in a cave. And he's either by himself or he's with his 400, I think it was 400 men that were very disgruntled. I'm not sure which, but look at verse 1. Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me, for in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge, till the storms of destruction pass by. I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purposes for me. He will send from heaven and save me. He will put to shame him who tramples on me. God will send out his steadfast love and his faithfulness. My soul is in the midst of lions. I lie down amid fiery beasts. The children of man whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They set a net for my steps. My soul was bowed down. They dug a pit in my way, but they had fallen into it themselves. My heart is steadfast, O God. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make melody. Awake, my glory. Awake, O harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you among the nations. For your steadfast love is great to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, among the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. All right, what do you guys notice here?
God takes refuge under God. David takes refuge under God's wings.
Yes.
And there's a correlation in Matthew where Jesus is talking to the people, oh, that he would have taken refuge under my wings like a hen that takes her chicks, but they weren't willing.
Yes. This is one of the feminine God is depicted as a he throughout the Bible, but there are times where God is depicted with feminine qualities. And this is one of them. Putting your wings over your, what would it be? Ducklings or chicks, whatever. Yeah, we have chickens. Yeah.
I'm also reminded of like Psalm 91, where like in verse 2, I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Verse 4, he will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge.
Yeah, this kind of imagery. So I heard one person describe one time, I don't know if this is true. Some of you who know more about chickens than me can tell me. But there's been stories of fires on a farm where the hen puts its wings over the little chickens, and the hen gets burned up, but the chickens are all preserved. Has anybody heard anything like that before? It was a pretty reputable person that told me about that, or that I heard him say about that. It was a Bible teacher in England. And so the imagery of the one that's putting the wings over, I'll take the hit for you. I'm the one I'll experience the pain for you, and I'll protect you in the process. But that kind of imagery is used several times in the Bible. What else do you guys notice here? Yeah, what verse are you looking at for that? Oh, yeah. If you find that, let me know. In verse 4, towards the end, look at the vivid description of the words people are using. I lie down amid fiery beasts, the children of man, whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Have you ever wondered at times in the Psalms why David would say things like shatter their teeth, break their mouth? Is he saying, God, just punch him in the face because I'd like to see that happen? No, it's a way of talking in the Psalms of stop their words. Make their words stop. And there's several Psalms, especially some of the earlier Psalms, like I think around Psalm 4, 5, or 6, brings up this imagery of shattering the teeth of the wicked. It's not just like a vindictive kind of language. It's saying stop their mouth from speaking these kinds of things. And it's a hyperbolic way of saying that. And that's just how the Psalms use that kind of language of the mouth and the teeth and everything. But notice in verse 5, be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. David has been talking about his suffering, but then he just interjects this praise for God. And towards the end of the psalm, he's going to be very concerned about God's reputation and whether or not people know who the Lord is. When we go through difficulties, are we interested in how people just see us, or are we also interested in how our suffering can be used to say something about the glory of God? And that's David's perspective in this. And you also see that in verse 9 with his evangelistic heart. There's several times where he does this from Psalm 51 to 65. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you among the nations. Well, David, right now you're in a cave. And you're either with 400 really angry people, or you're by yourself right now. I don't know which. And you anticipate this time where you're going to be brought out of this cave and you're going to pronounce the goodness of God to all the world? It's just amazing imagining him writing all of this while he's in this cave fleeing from Saul, who should have been praising him for having killed Goliath, but instead he got jealous. Anything else you guys notice here? Yep.
I found it in verse 2, but it might be my translation. I cry out to God most
Oh, yeah.
to God who fulfills his purpose for me.
Right.
So he does fulfill his purpose for all of us.
Yes. And he's writing that in a cave having to flee from the king. Like, God, you're gonna make this all work out for good. I trust that you will. Good. Matt?
Book 2 has a lot of emphasis on and themes on Exodus. I think he's alluding to a deliverance
Yes.
personally, and he goes to the steadfast love of God, the faithfulness of God, alluding to the covenant love that God showed his people, especially in Exodus, and especially Exodus 34, where he describes that steadfast love, the compassionate God who's slow to anger, abounding in
Yes.
love. He continues to go towards that. I think you see that when he repeats the be exalted, O God, above
Right.
Everything, it's a conclusio, so everything within that kind of alludes back to that point, and the big emphasis is on the steadfast love of God,
Yes.
needing a deliverance.
Yes. Yeah, and like David is going through his own exodus. And Psalms 1 through 41 have a lot of Genesis themes. 42 to 72, book 2, has a lot of Exodus themes. There's 5 books in the Psalms, and there's corresponding themes to the first 5 books of the Bible. And you see some of that happening here. All right, some things that we wonder. We kind of already know this from the title, but who is trampling on him? It's Saul and his people, the people that are going along with Saul, which sometimes Samuel describes people like this as worthless men, would be going after a righteous person like this. One thing I wonder in verse 5, and Matt brought this up in verse 11, it's repeated, "Be exalted, O God, above the heavens, let your glory be over all the earth." Isn't that already true? So why is he saying, like, let this be the case? Anybody have any idea on that? Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I was gonna say, it is obvious that the heavens show the glory of God at all times, but he's getting that perspective, of that. He's saying, hey, you are the God of the heavens, you are to be glorified. He's getting this perspective there of be exalted above the heavens, and he's remembering his perspective to the Creator.
And one of the reasons why he's being pursued like this is because people don't recognize that he is exalted above everything. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this to him. And so maybe part of this is, may other people recognize all of this about you as well. But there's times in our life where it doesn't seem like this is true. I mean, any of you looking forward to the election and just trusting that God's, he's got all this, or are we kind of really worried about a lot of things? God is exalted above. May I know that, may other people know that, and may you eventually fully and finally do something about that in the new heavens and the new earth. But right now we live in this time where evil does have a foothold in the world. Something else for me that I wondered in verse 6, when it talked about, they set a net for my steps, my soul was bowed down, they dug a pit in my way, but they have fallen into it themselves. Their own plans backfired on them. In what ways do we see that happen today? I mean, you can hear stories about people who embezzled money from their companies, and then eventually it comes to light. You can hear people having done all kinds of wicked things, and they think they're getting away with it, and eventually people realize what's happened. Trying to hide sin is like keeping a buoy under the water. It takes a lot of energy to do that, and then eventually it's going to come up and people are going to see. But anything else you guys wonder on this one?
These brothers their sin backfired on them.
Yep. And then it ended up blessing them, but they didn't deserve it. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next question. What are you reminded of? Psalm 142 is the other psalm David wrote when he was in the cave. We don't have time to do this right now, but if you were to compare and contrast the two psalms, is very interesting. Psalm 142, best chapter probably in the whole Bible on loneliness and what it means to be lonely, which you could imagine he would be if he was in that cave. In verse 4, he brings up the spears and arrows, and in the context, he's comparing that to the words of people, like we saw earlier. But David, in the context, had also been literally attacked by the spears of Saul when he was trying to pin him on the wall and make him like a piñata or something. The imagery of tramples over, we've seen that in chapter 56. Like, this is one of the ways that he describes how he's being treated. He's just being trampled over. Do you ever feel that way about sin and temptation? Like it keeps just trampling over you? And David is asking for God to deliver him from all of this. Anything else you guys want to say that you're reminded of here? All right, what prayers can we make from this? Yeah.
Verse 7, he talks about his confidence. His heart is confident.
Yes.
That's what I take from this. Even when, you're in that cave, whether he's alone, whether he's with whatever, 400, but to have confidence that that's going to work out, how do you make that prayer? How do you face that in verse?
Yes. Yeah, that was my first one too. To make our hearts steadfast in trial. It's amazing that this seems like it's pretty early on in David's fame. And he's already, I mean, there's things that he doesn't handle perfectly. In fact, have you guys noticed that there's 2 times when David is in a wilderness of sorts? The first time when he's running from Saul, he makes some mistakes there. But then the second time when he's running from his son Absalom in 2 Samuel, you see David having had grown in his character. But this is what he wanted his heart to be, that he didn't always live out perfectly, but then the second time he's fleeing from Saul, he's a changed person. But just encouraging that this is what he was concerned with here. Also, just help me to appreciate your steadfast love. How often do we think about that? God has kept every promise he's ever made. God has never lied, not once. And David, when he's facing all kinds of people that are mistreating him, he could just walk away from God and say, you know, this King Saul is supposed to be the king of the nation of Israel. Why do I even bother serving God anymore when they've got such wicked rulers? And David just keeps going back to the steadfast love of God. He's not going to look at imperfect people and really wicked and vile people that still think they're Jews and cause him to walk away from the love of God. So, all right, anything else you guys want to say about this psalm? Yep.
For the prayer part, verse 8, wake up my soul, wake up, heart and lyre. To me, it feels like, increase my zeal, don't let me get down. And,
Yeah, good.
like today, with our singing, if our zeal isn't high, if we're kind of discouraged or anything, we may not either be singing or just be like going with the melody. But if we're very happy and excited, then you can tell that within our prayers, within our
Yes.
and speaking, things like that.
And this seems like one of those examples of a vow. I will do this, God. Like, deliver me from this. This difficulty in my life right now is not going to be what the rest of my life is like. And so it would be an important thing to think about. So, yeah.
Well, steadfast means we know. We can count on it. You know, if the country's not there tomorrow, we have steadfast. God is steadfast. He'd be there for us.
Yes.
We can count on that 1,000%.
Yep.
And whether we think that, well, there's no United States of America, God is there.
Yep.
And that's something we can count on. And sometimes even, I know I forget that too.
Well, yeah, and David here is not going, God, what's happening to the nation of Israel right now? We got a wicked king, and he's trying to kill me, and I killed Goliath. Like, none of this is fair. Like, are we all done for? No, like, he knows that God's steadfast love transcends anything he can see. But this goes to the next psalm. In Psalm 58, he's going to talk about judgment against the wicked, that God will do something about these kinds of things in the world. So Psalm 58 is an imprecatory psalm. You guys know what imprecatory means? Where he's praying judgment on other people. An imprecatory psalm where David condemns corrupt leaders. He calls for divine judgment upon the wicked and envisions their downfall. The psalm ends with the righteous rejoicing when justice is completed. And the outline of it is the description of the wicked in the first 5 verses, prayer for judgment, and then the righteous is vindicated. Can you appreciate why David would have a psalm like this after we just looked at the previous 2? It's not like he just had a bad day and he just got really angry. No, he is the rightful king that's going to have the throne one day, and he does want to see justice be meted out to those who need it. So let's see how he talks about this, though. Look at Psalm 58. To the choir master, according to do not destroy, a miktam of David. Do you indeed decree what is right, you gods? Now, he's not talking about God there. Do you judge the children of man uprightly? No, in your hearts you devise wrongs. Your hands deal out violence on earth. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray from birth, speaking lies. They have venom like the venom of serpent. They like the deaf adder that stops its ears, so that it does not hear the voice of the charmers or of the cunning enchanter. O God, break their teeth in their mouths. Tear out the fangs of the young lions, O Lord. Let them vanish like the water that runs away. When he aims his arrows, let them be blunted. Let them be like the snail that dissolves into slime, like the stillborn child who never sees the sun. Sooner than your pots can feel the heat of thorns, whether green or ablaze, may he sweep them away. The righteous will rejoice when he sees the vengeance. He will bathe his feet in the blood of the wicked. Mankind will say, surely there is a reward for the righteous. Surely there is a God who judges on earth. All right. So there's a lot of, well, let's ask the first question. What do you notice here? He's mad. Yeah. Is there a place for righteous anger? You think about times where there's serial killers and they keep getting away with one after another. Would it be appropriate to say, God, stop this monster? Like, it's interesting. I read this a long time ago, but there was somebody who made the point that when we look at Psalms like this, and then we realize that most commentaries on the Bible are written by people who live in America. Do you think we might have a hard time relating to anything like what David is talking about here? I think the United States in our government is quite corrupt, but they've done a good job of kind of hiding it and making it so it's not as obvious. But you go to other countries where it's more and more obvious, and there's dead people on the side of I talked to somebody from Egypt one time and how it wasn't uncommon to see just a dead body on the side of the street as you walk to school. And you see all of the people taking advantage of other people, and it's out in the open and obvious. Can you imagine living in a time like that? Can you start to see how it might be, or the time when there's people in the Middle East, the Taliban, who took a busload filled with kids that were going to some kind of Christian school or something. This happened a few years ago, and they all got killed. Before we knew that they were all killed, would it have been appropriate to say, God, shatter these people, stop their plans? I think we would understand that. But because we're a little bit more insulated and the wickedness of our nation is not as obvious and overt, we sometimes look at Psalms like this and recoil a little bit, thinking, this is kind of strong. But what do you guys notice here?
It's funny that my translation says, verse 1, do you indeed speak righteousness, you silent ones? And it sounds like in your translation it mentioned God.
Yes.
And I'm reminded of, I know we're not there yet, but the unknown God,
Yes.
silent, couldn't speak because it didn't exist. Then it's saying, do you not know that you indeed speak righteousness, you judge uprightly, you sons of men. It's just funny that that translation is God says silent ones because false gods can't speak.
Yeah, and I think he's talking about these corrupt leaders who look at themselves like they're gods. Do you think you decree what's right, O gods? Can you imagine living in a time where the politicians are all mega corrupt? And could you pray that? Do you think you decree what's right? Do you not know that the Lord is the one that judges the children of men? You're not the one who does. You're not the one who has wisdom. Andrew?
So, verse 10, the righteous will rejoice when he sees the vengeance. He will bathe his feet in the blood of the wicked. This takes me back to Psalm 37, verses 12 and 13. The wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes his teeth at him, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he sees that his day is coming. And then down in verse 15 of Psalm 37, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with their plans backfiring. It says, their sword shall enter their own heart, and their bows shall be broken.
Yep. Yeah, you see the similar language of judging the wicked and then the righteous rejoicing when those kind of things happen. Verse 3, notice that these wicked people are almost pictured as having been born sinful. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray from birth, speaking lies. You know what passages of the Bible are the ones used by Calvinists to say that we're born sinful? Is Psalm 51. And David says basically the opposite about himself in Psalm 22, verse 9, where he trusted in the Lord from his mother's breasts. So there's times where in the Psalms you say, yeah, these people are so wicked, like they were corrupt from birth, which is a hyperbolic and ironic thing to say, because it's like we all know that you're not born sinful, but it's like these people are so wicked that they wanted to do evil from the beginning. Psalms is not, you don't take this and go, oh yeah, these people are born sinful. He's using this in an ironic, hyperbolic kind of way because we know that people are not born that way. You see the point? It's part of poetic license. All right, so verses 4 and 5 have this imagery of a ravenous adder or like these snakes that can't even hear the charmers. And so nothing's going to make them stop. It doesn't matter what you'd say to these wicked people. Nothing is going to get them to stop. It doesn't matter if if David had a town council that he could go before his politicians and like say all these things. You guys don't know what you're doing to people that live on the streets, and you guys are in your ivory tower. You can't say anything to these people that's going to change them. It's like a snake that's deaf to anything that would stop it. And then so verse 6, David is asking God, break the teeth, stop their words from speaking these kinds of things. And God's justice sends a message to the whole world are just some of the things that I noticed here. But you, again, notice the previous two Psalms, David's having all this mistreatment. God will do something about it one day. Anything that you wonder from this one? We talked about this a little bit, but in verses 1 and 2, to whom is David referring? He's talking about the corrupt politicians of his day. They probably wouldn't have used the word politician. They would have just used like their government, their rulers or their shepherds or something like that. But verse 10, is it right to rejoice when we see God's vengeance executed? What does it say in verse 10? The righteous will rejoice. Okay, so ask yourself this question. If there was justice that was meted out against evil, how could you rejoice? This is a hard thing to try to figure out. But if there would be nothing in you that would go, okay, that's good, then would that imply that maybe you're not a righteous person? Maybe. But how do we balance this attitude of rejoicing at vengeance, but it's not like this glee that you're just happy people are being fried or something? How do we think through this? Yeah.
Well, as a Christian, when we see God carrying out his vengeance, we should praise him and thank him for stepping in and doing this. Example, like the end of World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an obvious example. And people did. There was churches that had days of thankfulness, and they came in and prayed and thanked God for that,
Good. How else could we think about this? Because when you think about some terrible atrocity being stopped, sometimes the only way that you can stop it is by judging the people that have been doing these things, because they're like snakes that are deaf. No charmer is going to stop them. Yeah.
Possibly by also being thankful for like God not killing us, like because we are evil in a sense, our flesh, but God has been merciful and gracious enough to allow us to be reconciled back to Him.
Right.
So justice would, of course, be executed, but for those that are still with Him.
Yeah. Good. Anything else on this one? Yeah. I know. Right. Yeah, so I think in passages like this, it's at least just saying the corruption we see on earth, we're going to praise you when it's stopped. But I don't think it's saying we're really thankful that they're going to be frying in hell forever. I don't think it's taking it there. I think it's saying you've done something to stop things that are obviously corrupt. We would have tried to reason with them, but they're like adders that are deaf to their charmers. There's nothing we could have said. These people were so far gone, there's nothing we could have said that would have helped them. And so at least the threat has been neutralized, and in that we rejoice. I think is part of the idea. Samantha and then Brian. Yes, yes. Yes, sin has to be destroyed. And if we have a God that keeps tolerant, if we don't realize how bad it is, then we're like, well, what's the big deal here? If we see how bad it is, then we would understand. Brian? Yes, yeah, they've had chances. They've had chances to change. David has clearly cared about these people. He even stuck around Saul for some time after he was trying to kill him with a spear. So, yeah, good. All right, yeah. Yes. Yeah, good. All right. Psalm 59 to 61 next week.